Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of the Golden Hour, joined by Dr. Kevin Majors. Kevin, thanks for coming back.
Hey, Sharif. Thanks for having me.
Well, Kevin, we got this great email from someone who's been using OptimalWork, and it's a very interesting problem and something that I bet a lot of other people struggle with too, so including myself. So I thought I'd just let's dive in. Let's try and answer the question. So let me just read
Go
this.
for it.
This person says, my friends often say, and most of the time I agree, that we need to do projects right up at the deadline. And this is the only way to do them. I feel like I can only work under real pressure. And even when I challenge myself, I simply cannot recreate the pressure of a deadline imposed on me by a boss or a professor. Unless something is due tomorrow, I can hardly even start it. Does this make sense? Anyway, I know a lot of people are in the same boat with me, and I need to overcome this challenge. Thanks. All right. Kevin, what do you think?
I'm prepared to agree with him. So, in the sense that there's a lot you can get a bounce of energy by delaying starting, like strategic procrastination, deliberate procrastination. You put things off, you put them off, and so that you don't have that much time to deal with them, and then you know that you will deal with them at that time. And so as far as that goes, I think it could be a strategy that people use. Uh, But I think looking at this question, there's a problem in it. And I think that when people come with questions, it's super interesting to think of how can you answer the question in the way that they can apply to the widest number of situations. And so to do that, you have to think about where are there any deeper misconceptions that have been revealed, in the question. And I think that this question does have some deeper misconceptions. And if we focus on those, I think that not only will it solve this issue, but they will be able to apply it to a whole bunch of areas in life where they found that they were somehow blocked.
I mean, is that always the case, or is there something specific about this that jumps out at you? Like, okay, there's a deeper root cause going on here.
Yeah, it's the word I can't or I cannot.
Uh-huh. I
So
feel
whenever
like
people,
I can only.
uh,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. So those kind of words are flags. Anytime, if I catch myself saying I can't do that, well, because or we get tempted to say that, then you have to think, oh, okay, this is interesting. How do I dive in deeper? But and so there's some couple levels here. So I would say that maybe that's like the deepest level, but there are some issues that come before it. And so you can see here that there's this idea that I can only do intense work. I can only actually start working under pressure. So that could be a problem, right? I think that's a real issue because essentially it's like say, what is pressure? Pressure in some way is like what you feel of with an impending threat. So it's fear. It's like saying I can only work when I'm afraid of missing a deadline. Is that fair? Do you think? I think that's a fair.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's interesting that some people wouldn't even like someone who really doesn't care about school at all wouldn't even get motivated by a deadline imposed by a professor. So there's still some element that this is voluntary, that you're choosing to get scared or to to have fear of an impending deadline because you care about school.
Yeah, and in a way, they're by agreeing with that this isn't and by describing themselves this way, they are using it as a strategy. The problem with this is how fixed it seems. So that they're like, this is the only way that I can do it, or I cannot do it any other way. But again, I think that really they are motivated here by fear then. And they found that fear can fuel focus. But I think the problem with using fear as a kind of fuel is it's like cheap calories. Yes, it does give you some energy, but it's cheap. It's like Snickers. So I love Snickers. So, but at the same time, Snickers is like a short term strategy for getting some energy. It doesn't help people grow in the long term. You wouldn't want a growing human body to be just fed Snickers. And similarly, when it comes to like your schoolwork or your professional work, you wouldn't want your growth, your long trajectory, your long-term growth to be like fueled by fear. And I think that there are also unintended consequences of fear. Often we talk about threat mode and what happens when people are in threat mode. It just means that it's a certain way of working where there's a threat dominating you. But isn't that what like the impending deadline is? And so you end up really kind of getting hyper focused on attaining an outcome. In this case, finishing the thing by the deadline. And you don't end up thinking about the long term growth you can attain in it. So I think fear doesn't really mix well with growth and creativity. Yeah. It's like if you're going to be writing a paper, let's say that's what's due. How likely would you be to experiment with free writing or new forms of outlining or new strategies for writing papers if you're on a deadline, you don't have time? Yeah. So I think the deadline then can kill creativity and experimentation.
That's right, and also it prevents you from doing your best work because if following the example of writing a paper, if you realize that there's some problem with your research that you might need to actually to write a good paper, you'd actually need to research this whole other topic or this whole uh, or a problem with your thesis or something like that. You wouldn't address it because you only have 6 hours left to finish the paper, and you basically only have enough time to do it exactly how you normally do it. So I think it's really a gamble to use the deadline as like your sole source of motivation.
Yeah, and then what's the trajectory then to getting to the point where people get joy from writing papers and they love it and they see it's explorative and they're like there's all these their ideas get clarified, they get better at expressing, and they learn how to work out ideas that were somehow confused in their mind, and then they see there's a deeper way they're all fitting together. There are all these really enjoyable aspects, in this case, to writing. But there's a joy to be found in work, and that joy is compatible with full-on intensity, but not really with fear. So that's the problem here is that um, there it does actually detract from the quality of the work they can do, as you were saying, and also just from the quality of their way of working.
So okay, so then what advice do you give to someone who says, okay, I see that there's this potential joy in work, and I see that other things in my life I'm very motivated to just dive in and do them. It's not like playing sports. I can only do that if I'm motivated by the fear of a deadline. No, I mean I could just go out and enjoy myself. So how do I make homework and writing papers and other tasks more like that?
Well, there's still then a deeper problem in the question that I think we would have to address before approaching this. And the second deeper point is that this question assumes that somehow his ability to perform is depending on his emotions. Okay, so that if his emotions are helping him, like the fear is driving him to focus, then he can do good work. But if the emotions say aren't helping him or it's hard to do, he doesn't feel like doing it, then it's impossible. He can't do it. Okay, that fundamentally reverses the relationship between action and emotion. Now, this is counterintuitive, I know, but emotions are really predictions that our brain is making for what we're about to do, getting it ready and facilitating it. So if it sees, oh, this is the kind of situation where he is going to likely flee or fight, well, then it gives you the adrenaline to facilitate that action. If it's like it sees, oh, this is the kind of cake he loves eating, then it stimulates the craving, and that helps with the digestive processes to get kick-started. And so it's just emotions really are predictions for what you're about to do. Okay, so and ideally they facilitate doing that. And even in this case, where if you have an impending deadline and you're trying to work, your your lower cortex is helping you to have adrenaline that could help you actually to focus. But if you let your behaviors, your actions be completely guided by your emotions, like dependent on them, then it's the blind leading the blind. because emotions are the trainee and our actions are the trainer. Your emotional responses get completely shaped by action. So that way your body gets better, your lower cortex is better at predicting the kind of actions you're going to do next. So your lower cortex actually wants to be guided by action. It doesn't want to guide the action. It's just making a prediction. And if the prediction then becomes, you know, an accomplished fact every time it happens, then it's caught in a cycle and is broken. So I don't know if that's does that. I
I
hope that's
Yeah, I
clear.
think it makes sense to me. So, in this case, the fear is the prediction of the limbic system that you need adrenaline to engage this challenge to this deadline. So that's good, but you don't want to be reliant on that, and ultimately you want to shape it so that now, okay, do you want to shape it so that you can get that same fear? Uh, no, it seems like no. That if you're, say, doing the paper a week in advance, what would be the desired kind of emotional state that you would have at that time?
Yeah, I think just to say in the big picture, in this case, the deadlines should not create the schedule. That's actually making our planned actions dependent on our expected emotions. So that's completely backwards. The schedule should create the deadlines. The freely chosen and crafted schedule should create the deadlines for you that gradually then you train your limbic system to take those seriously. But I think you need the habit of honoring a deadline that you set yourself to such an extent that it has the capability of giving you the help of adrenaline. So you can get an emotional boost that then helps you to do those actions in the future, but never should you feel like you depend on it because the action is what eventually trains that a boost to happen. So, but what you do initially is, and I think that you can attain flow without feeling a pressure of a deadline in any way. And so because flow is where you do your best work, just having high hopes for how well you can do something gives you the same adrenaline and doesn't rely on the deadline. So I would say it's better that people rely on high hopes for how they could do something rather than fears of not doing it. And if they like honor deadlines, they will still get a benefit too. So then you get best of both worlds. You have high hopes that help to shape how you're doing it, but uh, but then you also have the eventually, if you keep honoring these deadlines, then you get a boost too.
Yeah. Now, so how long does this retraining take? And it seems like it while you're retraining, you're retraining the amygdala, so you're not going to be going into threat mode necessarily. You're not going to be going into threat mode, so you're not going to get the same kind of adrenaline of like pounding heart rate, like pounding
Yeah,
heartbeat and things.
you wouldn't want
So
to actually be peripheral anyway.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it's going to feel a little bit different. So uh, this person who's asking this question shouldn't expect that, okay, now when my actions are guiding my emotions, I'm just going to retrain it so I feel this way more under my control. But they're going to feel different, and it might take time for that process to happen, right?
Yeah, I think so because really when you have internal adrenaline in your brain, the which is the performance enhancing, variety of it, you could say, because it could be either in your body or in your brain. Uh, the internal one just feels like intensity, but it also tends to just be invisible. So you just don't notice that it's there. And it's easier though to perform everything. When adrenaline is outside of the brain in the body and your heart's pounding or stuff, or you feel stressed, you feel tension, well, that is more noticeable, but it's less helpful for performance. But the more you welcome adrenaline in itself and say, hey, all this kind of charge is exactly what I need to perform well, bring it on, it actually does transfer into the brain more. The positive appraisal of adrenaline unlocks this kind of internal, yeah, adrenaline, and you just get more excited. So I do think that you learning how to reframe adrenaline does help, but once it's reframed, it doesn't feel the same. You're totally right.
Yeah, it seems like the adrenaline, the peripheral adrenaline going to your body, it might help you with kind of executing the same strategy that you're very familiar with, but it's going to prevent you from being creative. So if you're kind of up against a gun with a paper and you just like have to finish it in 5 hours, and you kind of have a way of doing it, the adrenaline is going to help you just do it that way. But the noradrenaline in your brain is going to help you be more creative. Is that accurate?
Yeah, totally. I think that um, when you have this internal kind of the positive intensity kind of adrenaline, you are not thinking about it because you're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about the task at hand or the person you're with. Uh, it's also then much more experienced as excitement or enthusiasm. And so, if I'm working with a patient and I have an hour to do work, the thought of like, "Oh, I better accomplish X, Y, and Z before the timer strikes the hour," that's not helpful at all. But I'm always enthused, I should say, I think about how much progress can we make in 1 hour and trying to be like, daring in how I set goals for what can be done in an hour. And so it's exciting and it's joyful to be trying to help people more in a given amount of time and to get better and better at doing that, which requires then experimenting, trying things and seeing what works and what doesn't work and always making it more efficient. And that's how you grow in mastery of any kind of craft. So you really grow in mastery when you have this positive sense of challenge, not something just getting it done by a certain time out of fear.
Yeah, so there's a real problem with this approach that this person is taking, that they need the adrenaline to perform well, and then because they perform in a particular way with fear, they don't get better at what they're doing, and then so they still need the adrenaline the next time. So there's not a sense of actually growing in mastery, but they're just kind of trapped, and they're not necessarily getting better, or at least not as fast as they could be.
Yeah. And I think you also see then, I think that there's a certain penalty that we pay when we let our actions be guided or controlled by our emotions. And that penalty is that we then come up with false reasoning and excuses that explain why that had to be the case. And so that's where people then kind of saying, I'm just not capable of doing X, or, I always have to do this. What that means, I think, all of these limiting beliefs or beliefs about your own limitations, all of those in some way are just explaining post hoc, why, in a sense, it made sense that we let our actions be guided by our emotions. So I think it's a bold claim, but I think that limiting beliefs, any belief people have in a limitation, like I just can't do it that way, that's actually an emotional kind of blockage. So, and it's just explaining a time when they give into an emotion rather than letting their actions shape the emotion gradually over time. And so, like any emotion, limiting beliefs feel permanent. Emotions always feel permanent when they come. So if you're sad about something, it feels like you will always be sad about it. And if you're fearful of something, it feels permanent always. Cravings, when people try breaking some bad habit and they get cravings, then those cravings always will feel permanent. And they might then have a limiting belief, I just can't live without X, Y, or Z. So, and that, especially if they give in to the cravings, like, yeah, I'm just not strong enough to resist. But all those limiting beliefs it's really the same thing as the emotional blockage. The other thing that's interesting with limiting beliefs is that just questioning them makes you feel uncomfortable. So I have, I have for many years not felt really comfortable playing piano in front of large groups. And so I could easily have the limiting belief, I just can't play in front of people. But it does mean that at one point, in fact, I shied away from doing it. There's an opportunity I had and I didn't do it. And then I let the emotion of fear guide the action, and then it can become quickly this belief, I just can't do it. And if I question, well, can I do it? You start to feel the fear again. Ooh, I guess that's gonna mean going out on a limb. It's gonna mean trying something new. It's gonna mean maybe, messing things up in front of people and making mistakes. Okay, and the more I can just say, "Hey, so be it," the better I feel about making those mistakes, then the faster I get over it. And, so I think that this idea of the limiting belief, somehow whatever the challenge is always just appears negative, and we don't see how we can embrace it and grow through it.
That's great. So okay, so now we did a deep dive into these kind of root causes, uh, and so we've got to take a very different perspective on the question originally posed. Now, now, what's the path forward? How can this person, the next time they have something assigned, say it's due in 2 weeks, how can they start working on it a week early? How can they motivate themselves? What should they do?
Yeah. Well, one thing is they should recognize that they're gonna gradually make progress in being able to do this. And so it's not just that they're the kind of person who can't start things a week early. It's just when they try doing that, it's gonna feel different. And so they need to be curious about this new experience and trying to see what are the actual emotional blocks that come up when they try doing it. And then experiment with new ways of scheduling these types of projects. So, for instance, you could, if you have a paper due in a week, or let's say, just an example of paper, if the person has, like, okay, my deadline for day one is to come up with the thesis statement. And then by day two, to come up with an outline, and they break it up. If every day, if like the whole plan basically needs to be kept so you're not having to do multiple things in one day, you do get some distribution of the deadline urgency, with each day. Because I need to finish this step before I do the next step. I need to finish that before I do the next. So you have these deadlines that each depend on each other. It just means you look at the project overall, you break it into steps, and then each step you assign to a day, for instance. So that there is a little mini deadline that needs to be completed before you move on to the next step. That could make it easier to distribute it. Um, but the real thing here is they need to see that doing this kind of new approach that violates one of their limiting beliefs is going to feel like at first there's no sense of emotional support driving it because their actions are now instructing their emotions. But the better they get at just holding their actions to this ordered ideal, the more natural it will be. And the more they will start to see there's a lot to enjoy about doing it this way. And they'll come to love working with more of this kind of order and intensity rather than out of fear, just kind of getting it done quickly.
So then in the moment when they're sitting down and they're kind of feeling, okay, I want to do the outline today. Now I don't feel motivated at all. So you say, just do it.
I think you would say, yeah, make the step as simple as possible. Just keep breaking it down and make it very doable. You don't need a huge amount of adrenaline to accomplish a small goal. So trying to accomplish the big goal all in 6 hours, okay, that does require a lot of adrenaline. But there's, as we are saying, I think there's a lot of downsides to that. Although it could be used strategically if you're wise enough to like to know when to use it and when not to use it. But breaking it down into something small and scheduled, you see, you can work well independent of how much pressure, drive, or adrenaline you feel. And then gradually, by honoring these smaller deadlines, they, in fact, the sense of urgency does get more and more under voluntary control. But that's a gradual process of shaping over time.
Okay, that's really cool. So you would say, okay, so you have this paper due in 2 weeks or a week. Okay, can you break it down into 5 steps? And they would say, okay, yeah, sure. Here, this, and this. Okay, now take the first step. Can you break that one down into 5 steps? Okay, now is this small? Now is this first step small enough that you could just do it right now? If yes, okay, do it right now. If not, break it down more.
Exactly. I think the lesson there is that with order, people can learn to work with tranquility, and in advance. Um, and but they'll also see that They are more creative. They come up with more strategies. They actually have much more joy and fun in doing the work because they can actually have the space, the mental freedom to enjoy it and to do it well.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, I think we're out of time here, but so I don't know if you have any final thoughts you want to add.
Uh, no, just this idea that there is like there's when people are breaking down tasks and then really doing each step well and challenging them in each step, what happens is they get a kind of momentum that then carries them through, even if it's spread over days. There is a kind of momentum there, because in accomplishing this big task, they just broke it into smaller steps. But I think that's a good lesson for all of life, where if you can see way that you want to change, think of one of your limiting beliefs about your character, about relationships, not to think you're just going to do this all in one go. What would it look like to break it into smaller steps that then you can, with time, fully address and learn to embrace the challenge on that step by step? It's a progress. It's like progression, of steps that you're learning how to break things down and space them out.
Awesome. That's great, Kevin. All right. Well, thanks so
Thanks,
much,
Reef.
and we'll be back next week.